The Monroe Doctrine has actually two very attractive elements to it. Uh, One is anti-imperialism. Don't meddle in the internal affairs of other countries. It was an early statement of this, but now this is enshrined in the UN Charter. So the idea that countries are sovereign and other countries should not meddle in their internal political affairs is a very good idea. It's one the United States does not recognize in practice because the U.S. foreign policy is typically based on regime change operations. Of all the countries in the world, in fact, the United States doesn't have diplomacy in the normal sense of saying, well, we have issues with you, let's negotiate. When the United States doesn't like another government, as long as it's small enough, it says, we will change you, we will overthrow you. And there have been, of course, probably about 100 such regime change operations. I like to reference the wonderful book by Lindsay O'Rourke called Covert Regime Change. She was a PhD student of John Mearsheimer, and she did a wonderful study of all of the U.S. regime change operations between 1947 and 1989. And she enumerated 64 covert regime change operations. Covert meaning the U.S. tried to overthrow the government and then lied about it, denied its engagement. So this is what is first opposed in the Monroe Doctrine, very attractive. Second, the Monroe Doctrine, as we both mentioned, is reciprocal, which is, again, completely forgotten. The United States says clearly, we will not meddle in Europe's affairs. And that goes back actually to George Washington's farewell address, where he argues against entanglements in European affairs, that the United States should not become entangled in Europe's endless wars. So these are two attractive ideas, non-intervention and reciprocity as a basic norm. I think they can be built into a legitimate system today, which we've discussed and which I call spheres of security. And by spheres of security, it is a kind of takeoff on the Monroe Doctrine, stated a little bit differently, but it is that the major powers, and by this I mean the large nuclear powers that can project power outside of their borders, the United States, Europe, Russia, China, India, I believe that these countries should respect the borderlands of the other great powers so as not to provoke what could become a nuclear war. And this would be one part. It's like the Monroe Doctrine. It says Russia or China should not intervene in the Americas, but the United States should not intervene in Russia's near neighborhood, Ukraine, or in China, Taiwan. And this would be reciprocal. But I would pair this with the good neighbor policy of Franklin Roosevelt, which actually worked and is very important. And yet another reason why I regard Franklin Roosevelt as the greatest American president. When he came into office, he said, we will stop these military interventions of the United States in the Americas. And he did so. His vision was, we'll be a lot more secure ourselves if we have collective security in our region. So the idea of a sphere of security is a great power arrangement where the great powers say we won't step over the red lines of other great powers to avoid global conflict, something the United States blatantly violated in the case of pushing NATO enlargement to Ukraine and to Georgia. But the good neighbor policy says that is not a license for Russia to run Ukraine or to run Georgia any more than it's a license for the United States to run Mexico or to overthrow the government of Venezuela, which is what Trump is trying to do right now. So these are the two principles I would like. Non-intervention by great powers in the neighborhoods of other great powers so that we don't blow up the world, but also saying to the great powers, you are not a bully in your hemisphere. You have no right of military intervention. You have no right to do exactly what Trump is doing right now in Venezuela, which is explicitly to destabilize Venezuela for the purpose of overthrowing a government. That should not prevail. It's against the UN Charter, and my view is it's against U.S. security. Yes, we can do all sorts of things, but does it lead to good results? No. When you look at the lessons of Lindsay O'Rourke's wonderful study, you find out that these regime change operations typically are disasters. Yes, maybe a government is overthrown, but what comes next? Typically, civil war, unrest, mass migration, economic collapse. In other words, this doesn't produce something stable, it produces something unstable that can then actually escalate into a new regional or global disorder. So the idea of meddling, overthrowing governments, declaring oneself under the Trump corollary as a bully of the hemisphere, it's not in America's own interest, much less the interests of the target countries.